Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining today's session on clinical case discussions and radiology. So, during this session, we would be discussing 10 different clinical cases as well as 10 different radiology cases. And presiding over the session would be Dr. Antarip, as usual. Antarip, I invite you to take over the session from here on.
Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar on clinical card discussion and radiology discussion. So clinical cards are an important part in the practical examination. A lot of universities, a lot of colleges provide you with printed cards with a case or something like that written on it, or it can be a picture also sometimes. So we would be discussing 10 of them to give you an idea. We are also posting these clinical cards on our Facebook page. So be sure to like and follow the page for further updates. And for radiology also, we have a separate section in our app where I've discussed about a lot of radiology images in detail, which is not possible here in a webinar because of the time limit and all. I'll try to highlight the important points. I have tried to include some very important radiological images here in this webinar, but a lot of them, few more of them have been discussed in the radiology section of the app. So just like our previous webinar on instrument discussion, this is going to be uh, interactive where uh, like I would like you to answer the questions. So let us begin with our clinical card discussion. So this is the first clinical card. So I request you to go through it and answer very short how you are going to manage this case. Okay, so we are getting some answers. Okay, so we have got an answer that we have to carry out initial resuscitation with fluids, IV antibiotics, proton pump inhibitors, and then we have to carry out laparotomy as the patient is unstable. So we have a 38-year-old laborer with history of alcohol intake. This is a very important hint. And he presents to the ER with excruciating abdominal pain. His pulse, we can see that he has tachycardia and his BP is low, it's 80/60, and the abdomen shows cardboard rigidity. So cardboard rigidity means that he has peritonitis, and he is somewhat in shock because we have features of shock here. We have tachycardia and we have low BP, we have hypotension. So the first thing that we need to do is to carry out an initial resuscitation to manage shock, and management of shock is two wide bore IV cannula on two hands. Okay, and then fluid resuscitation. The first fluid of choice is RL. It is crystalloids, and among crystalloids, it is Ringer's lactate or RL. So after we have resuscitated the patient, we also carry out Ryle's tube, okay, aspiration, and IV antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors. And then we carry out laparotomy. So what is the provisional diagnosis? The provisional diagnosis is that this is a case of peptic perforation. The patient is alcoholic, that is a very strong hint, and he is presenting with excruciating abdominal pain, second hint. And the third hint is that we have cardboard rigidity, that is, we have peritonitis due to peptic perforation. So this is how you should manage the case in very short. Next, case 2. So this is a 20-year-old female who presents to the ER with history of being locked in a burning room for a long time. She had burns over both of her hands, chest, back, abdomen, and pubic area. So in this case, how are you going to manage the case? So definitely initial resuscitation again, but after that, just give me some answer that how you are going to manage this case after initial resuscitation, or how you are going to carry out initial resuscitation. So this is an interactive session and I want everyone to participate. Okay, please type in your answers in the chat box so that you can learn, you can be involved, and you can learn very easily in a better fashion. So we got our answer here that we have to carry out fluid resuscitation using Parkland's formula. And before that, we have to carry out body surface area bond using Wallace's rule of 9. So here she has burns over both of her hands, her chest, her back, abdomen, and pubic area. So we have to calculate it according to the rule of 9, and we get the body surface area. Then we apply Parkland's formula. We get the fluid volume in ml, and half of it is to be transfused in the first 8 hours and the next half in the next 16 hours. So we get a fluid for the next 24 hours. We divide it into first 8 and next 16 hours. So we have talked about burns. Okay, so there I have extensively discussed about Parkland's formula, Wallace's rule of 9, and everything. So here basically you will need to uh, talk about Wallace's rule of 9 and Parkland's formula most importantly. And yes, we have got the another answer that we have to check for burns of respiratory tract. This is also very important because we have this patient locked in a burning room for a long time. So there can be, okay, burns in the respiratory tract. There can be soot in the respiratory tract and the external nostrils, etc. So we have to be sure that the patient is not suffering from a respiratory burn also, because she was trapped in a burning room for a long time. So let's move on to case clinical card 3. So we have a 45-year-old male who presents to the surgery OPD with complaints of bleeding per rectum after defecation. He describes the blood as bright red and mentions that it occurs at the end of passage of stool. He does not complain of any pain or discomfort, but mentions that he suffers from constipation quite frequently. He appears slightly pale and his vitals are stable. So what is the most probable diagnosis? Please type in your answers in the chat box. So the important features here is that he complains of bleeding per rectum after defecation. That is important. Next is that he describes the blood as bright red. That is the second most important point. And it occurs at the end of passage of stool. That is the third point, which is important. The fourth important point is that he does not complain of any pain or discomfort. Fifth important point is that he suffers from constipation for quite a long time and he appears pale. So we have got two answers, that it is hemorrhoids. Yeah, three answers now. So it is hemorrhoids or piles. So the medical term is hemorrhoid. So it is better to answer as hemorrhoid. Uh, First degree, we cannot say with this history. It can be second degree also. It can be third degree also. So basically degree of hemorrhoids depend on the, yes, whether it is prolapsing or not, whether the prolapse is getting like cured automatically, that is the hemorrhoid is prolapsing and after some time it is retracting, so that is 2. If it's not prolapsing, it is 1. So we start with 1. If it's prolapsing, it's 2. If it's prolapsing and not retracting automatically, the patient has to push it inside with his hand, that is grade 3. And it is not being able to, so the patient also cannot retract or cannot push the prolapsed hemorrhoid inside, that is grade 4. So it is better that the most probable diagnosis here is hemorrhoid. Grade we can't say with this much of history. How are you going to examine the patient? We have to examine using, yes, digital rectal examination. That is, we have to carry out a PR examination and we have to carry out a proctoscopy. An important thing here is that the patient does not have any pain or discomfort, so we can easily carry out a PR examination or proctoscopy. If it was a case of anal fissure, so differentiating points between hemorrhoids and anal fissure, the most important point is that in anal fissure also there is bleeding, but the most important and classical finding is that the patient has excruciating pain. So in suspected cases of anal fissure, we do not carry out any rectal examination or any proctoscopic examination. So here, since the patient does not complain of any pain or discomfort, we have to carry out a digital rectal examination, and next we have to carry out a proctoscopy in which we directly visualize the anal canal. And The definitive treatment options available. So we have a lot of treatment options available nowadays. The treatment options can be injection sclerotherapy. So we inject sclerosants into the hemorrhoids, the prolapsed or the hemorrhoids, the prolapsed hemorrhoids usually for grade 2 and grade 3. Next, we can carry out band ligation. Next, we can carry out hemorrhoidectomy. So we basically remove the hemorrhoids. This can be an open or closed procedure. Next, we can carry out a stapled hemorrhoidopexy. So we use a circular sort of stapler here, a special type of stapler for hemorrhoids to carry out stapled hemorrhoidopexy. And we can also carry out something known as the DHAL, which is Doppler guided hemorrhoidal artery ligation. This is done to prevent the bleeding. So these are the definitive treatment options which are available for management of hemorrhoids. So hemorrhoids is a very important topic for your theory. It can be asked as a short note. So please be thorough about hemorrhoids. What are the most common positions for these hemorrhoids? So can someone please answer that what are the most common positions of the hemorrhoids? Yes, so we got an answer that it's 3 and 7 o'clock. Yes, it's 3, 7, and 11 o'clock. So these are the most common positions. So we divide the, or we like analyze, so we basically compare the anal opening with that of a clock. The 12 o'clock position is the scrotum. So accordingly, we like make it analogous to a clock. And the most common positions for the hemorrhoids are 3 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. So we move on to our next slide, which is case number 4. Here we have a 26-year-old female who presents to the emergency with acute pain in the right lower abdomen since the last 4 hours, along with nausea and vomiting. She got married 6 months back. So on examination, we have 140 per minute pulse, BP is 90/60, and on per abdominal examination, we have rigidity and tenderness over the right iliac fossa. So I wanted to answer the first question, that what are the most two important differential diagnoses? So what are you going to suspect? Pain, right iliac fossa, features of shock, nausea and vomiting, and a 26-year-old female. Okay, so we got some answers. Yes, more or less everyone is correct. The most two important differential diagnoses are ruptured ectopic and acute appendicitis. Appendicular lump usually does not present with these acute features. Appendicular lump occurs after an attack of acute appendicitis, and we would be able to palpate a lump in the right iliac fossa. So it is basically a sequelae of acute appendicitis. So the most two important differential diagnoses are ruptured ectopic pregnancy and acute appendicitis. But be careful that we are talking about a 26-year-old female here. If the question was male, then please don't mention ruptured ectopic, because sometimes these things happen that in the exam you are just thinking about these two differentials and the patient is a male. So it's mentioned in the clinical card or in the question, or the examiner has asked you that we have a 26-year-old male who presents with pain in the right iliac fossa. What can be the differentials? And there you mention about ruptured ectopic. So that is completely, discredit on you. So please don't do things like this. So yes, so everyone was correct more or less. Two investigations which you would prefer in the emergency setting to reach your diagnosis. Of course, we would prefer to carry out an urine for pregnancy test to rule out pregnancy when we are suspecting ruptured ectopic. And the second is that we would of course like to carry out an USG. So an emergency USG. And how will you immediately manage the patient? If the patient is that is pregnant, then we have to manage as we have studied it in gynecology. So we have to basically carry out laparotomy, because we might have hemoperitoneum, and if it's appendicitis, then we have to carry out appendicectomy. Okay, so let's move on to our next card, which is card 5. Here we have a 65-year-old woman who presents with 2 days history of increasing vomiting and abdominal distension. She has not passed any stool or flatus since the last 24 hours. She had been diagnosed with a large solitary gallstone 2 years back, but had refused to undergo surgery for personal reasons. So it would be for, okay. So she had refused to undergo surgery for personal reasons. So what is the most probable diagnosis? Please type in your answers in the chat box. Anything that you like, you feel. So this is not an actual exam, so we are just doing this for practice. So anything that you feel, you can write here. So basically, just analyze it like this. We have a woman who presents with today history of increasing vomiting and abdominal distension. So what first comes to your mind when you hear these terms vomiting and abdominal distension? Features of, yes, intestinal obstruction. And you can see that she has not passed any stool or flatus in the last 24 hours. So you are sure that is going to be intestinal obstruction. A very important hint is in the next line that she had been diagnosed with a large solitary gallstone 2 years back and she has not undergone a surgery. So we already got the correct answer. This is gallstone ileus. So basically the gallstone has passed into the ileum and it is causing intestinal obstruction. Okay. So what investigation will you like to carry out? So investigation for any suspected uh, intestinal obstruction. So we have to carry out a straight extra abdomen in erect posture. So we would be able to appreciate the air fluid levels and typical features of small bowel obstruction. And definitive management is definitely its exploratory laparotomy and yes, relieving the obstruction. Maybe we have to carry out resection anastomosis or we have to carry out an enterotomy. We have to remove the stone and we have to carry out a primary repair, or we may have to carry out resection anastomosis, or we may even have to carry out an ileostomy or any type of stoma. So these things depend on the condition of the patient, whether the gut is gangrenous or not. But the main management is an exploratory laparotomy. That is the management usually for intestinal obstruction. And before that, of course, anything, anytime you're asked about management, you have to tell about initial resuscitation, Ryle's tube, decompression, etc. But here the question is definitive management. So okay, we have a question why it's not acute pancreatitis as gallstone is an important risk factor. See, the features here are not corresponding to acute pancreatitis because the patient has not passed any stool or flatus since the last 24 hours and she has present with increasing vomiting and abdominal distension. Yes, a patient of acute pancreatitis can present with vomiting, but will usually not present with abdominal distension. We don't have any feature of obstruction in acute pancreatitis, right? So stool, flatus, these things would be normal in most cases of acute pancreatitis. So this points out to the picture of intestinal obstruction. I'm not saying that gallstone is not a risk factor for acute pancreatitis, but the features the patient has presented with are not corroborating with that of acute pancreatitis. Okay, if it was say pain radiating to the back, excruciating epigastric pain, okay, and maybe amylase lipase raised, then it can be gallstone pancreatitis. But here the features are that of intestinal obstruction. So first you have to understand the main feature. The main feature here is intestinal obstruction, and then you move on to the hint, which is gallstone. So what is the cause of the intestinal obstruction? It is that gallstone. So ultimately it is the gallstone ileus. Okay, I hope I am clear. Next, let's move on to the next clinical card, which is number 6. A 45-year-old man complains of sudden onset of severe epigastric pain radiating to the back of 6 hours duration. The pain has gradually spread to the rest of the abdomen and now he also has pain in his right shoulder tip. On examination, he has thoracic respiration and the abdomen shows board-like rigidity. What is the provisional diagnosis? Please type in your answers in the chat box. Yes, so we got correct answers. So we had discussed a similar case in the past, but here uh, this is deliberately said that the patient has severe epigastric pain radiating to the back. So a lot of people might think that it is acute pancreatitis because we have a severe pain radiating to the back. But as I've mentioned, as I've discussed in my videos also, nothing is like 2 plus 2 4 in our medical field. So you have to pay attention to the other features also. So don't just jump to the conclusion after hearing that the patient has severe epigastric pain radiating to the back and think that it is acute pancreatitis, because the pain has gradually spread to the rest of the abdomen and he has pain in the right shoulder tip and he has thoracic respiration and board-like rigidity. So features of peritonitis, exactly. And the other question that I want to ask you, why does he have a right shoulder tip pain? Can anyone answer in the chat box? Yes, so we got a correct answer that peritonitis will cause irritation of the phrenic nerve. Yes, irritation of the diaphragm and irritation of the phrenic nerve. And we know, according to the root value, that yes, we also have like supply in the near the shoulder, the root value, according to the root value. So that is why irritation of the phrenic nerve is also going to cause a pain in the shoulder. So how will you manage? We have to carry out an exploratory laparotomy. Since it's peptic perforation, after exploratory laparotomy, we have to repair it. We can either repair it simply or we can repair it using an omental patch. So we bring the omentum and we suture it up over the defect or the perforation, and that is known as Graham's patch repair or the modified Graham's patch repair. So this is the management. So next, let's move on to our card 7. So we have a 55-year-old woman who suffered from an acute abdominal pain 6 weeks ago, which was associated with nausea and vomiting. The pain lasted for 3 days, during which she had been treated with analgesics and antiemetics. The pain subsided, and subsequently she was referred to the surgical OPD. Abdominal examination showed a globular non-tender mass in the right upper quadrant moving with respiration. What is the provisional diagnosis? Please type in your answers in the chat box. Please participate in this.
Gallbladder.
Please participate in this interactive session so that you can learn in a better fashion. If I am the only one who is talking here, then it sort of becomes boring. And at the end of the discussion, a lot of people won't learn anything. But if you work your mind during this session, if you want to answer, if you can answer, you can write anything you feel like. It's not the actual exam, okay? You can write anything you feel like. So this would develop your analytical power and analytical mindset. So we got two answers: appendicular lump and acute cholecystitis. Appendicular lump is not correct because the mass is in the right upper quadrant. So less chance of being the appendix or any appendicular lump. And it is globular, it is non-tender, and it is moving with respiration. Another answer we got is acute cholecystitis, sort of along the similar lines. So let me just discuss this. So what had happened? A 55-year-old woman developed acute abdominal pain 6 weeks ago, and it has been associated with nausea and vomiting. So what sort of pain? Yes, so we got a very accurate and correct answer. This is basically mucocele of gallbladder. Exactly. Why? Because this patient had suffered from abdominal pain 6 weeks ago, which has been associated with nausea and vomiting. So, what was that? That was basically a biliary colic, and that had been managed with analgesics and antiemetics. After that, the pain had subsided because it was a biliary colic, and then she was referred to the SOPD. Now, what has happened is that the patient has developed mucocele of the gallbladder. The gallbladder is distended with mucus. Okay, we have talked about mucocele of gallbladder in discussion on gallbladder in the app. So basically, the stone is now near the neck. It has impacted there. It is impacted there, and it is causing, yes, uh, pent up secretions inside the gallbladder, leading to mucocele, and it has led to distension of the gallbladder, and that is the globular non-tender mass that we can feel in the right upper quadrant, and it is moving with respiration as usual. So yes, sort of a tricky question here. So we are tempted to think about other causes here, but the hint is that she had biliary colic. That pain 6 weeks ago was biliary colic. And another important hint is that we have a globular non-tender mass in the right upper quadrant, which is moving with respiration, most probably a gallbladder mass, and features suggestive of mucocele. Okay. So this was clinical card 7. Next, let's move on to clinical card 8. So we have pictures of two items here, very common in the surgical ward. So please identify them and mention one important use, or maybe the only use, whatever. Please type in your answers in the chat box. So this year you have not visited the ward because everything is closed. I can understand. If you had, these two would, you would have definitely observed in the ward. Any guesses, anyone? The first one is quite easy. You can try. Okay, so I don't think anyone else is going to answer. So the first tube-like thing that we can see, as someone has answered, it is basically a Ryle's tube. Nasogastric tube, yes. The actual name is a Ryle's tube. And the second one, this one, this is a, yes, we have got the answer spirometer. The full name is an incentive spirometer. Incentive spirometer, and this is Ryle's tube. So let me just tell you more about them. So this is a Ryle's tube which we use for nasogastric aspiration. So we insert it through the nostril and it reaches the stomach. Okay, and we have markings here at 40 centimeter, 50 centimeter, and 60 centimeter to guide us. So this is the 50 centimeter mark. This is the 60 centimeter mark, if you can appreciate. And can someone say what is this at the end of the Ryle's tube? This part? Any guesses, anyone? And also, what is this green line throughout the whole of the Ryle's tube? This is a very important question. You might be provided with a Ryle's tube in the exam in the instrument tray also. Yeah, we got two answers, but I think you got confused. It is not radiolucent, it is going to be radio opaque. If it's radiolucent, then it won't be visible on X-ray, right? So yeah, I can understand that you have the concept, but you messed up with the term. So this green line and this portion, yes, we also got a correct answer for that. Lead shots at the end. So lead is radio opaque, and this green line is also made up of radio opaque material. So the importance is that when we carry out an X-ray, I'll show you one like X-ray in the radiological discussion also. We can appreciate the Ryle's tube inside the esophagus and stomach. So that is the utility of this green line and also the lead sort of ball or lead sort of thing material at the end. So this is basically radio opaque for easy visualization in on X-ray. And one important use of Ryle's tube is of course nasogastric aspiration or gastric decompression. Whenever we want to carry out any say GI surgery, patients with obstruction, patients with say peptic perforation, things like that, acute abdominal cases, we just put in a Ryle's tube to decompress. Also patients who are not NPM before the OT, we have to carry out a Ryle's tube to prevent aspiration during the operation. So this is about Ryle's. The next thing, this is incentive spirometer. What is the use of this? Yes, the use is breathing exercises. Why do we need breathing exercises? To open up the alveoli. Why do we need to open up the alveoli? Because a very important complication in a say major surgery after general anesthesia, when the patient is supine for a long time and recovering from surgery, one of the very important complications on day one is atelectasis, that is collapse of the alveoli. So in order to open the alveoli, we have to provide the patient with this incentive spirometer so that he or she can breathe in deeply. Otherwise the patient won't breathe. If you ask a post-op patient who is who has pain, who is sort of in a critical condition till that time, just recovering from post-op, maybe post-op day one, if you ask him or her to take a deep breath, he or she won't take the deep breath as necessity. So you have to provide the patient with this incentive spirometer, and we have three balls here, and whenever the patient takes in a deep breath, we have these balls which rise up, and it rises up according to the pressure the patient breathes in. So maybe at first the green ball, then if you put in more pressure, the yellow ball, and finally if you put in more pressure, the red ball also rises up. So we have this sort of incentive that the patient needs to raise all these three balls in order to accurately and properly carry out the breathing exercise, because otherwise we cannot measure, we cannot assess whether the patient is carrying out a proper breathing exercise or not. So we provide this incentive spirometer to the patient, and from post-op day 1 or 2 we have to allow the patient to carry out this breathing exercise. What happens is that the patient is supine, patient is recovering from general anesthesia, and also the patient has abdominal pain. So this prevents deep respiration, and that causes atelectasis, that causes collapse of the alveoli. So this deep breathing using this incentive spirometer is going to open up the alveoli. And what are we preventing? We are preventing, yes, chest infections, because one of the most important cause of fever in post-op day 1 is atelectasis and chest infection. So we are preventing this with this use of incentive spirometer. So I hope I am clear with these two things now, Ryle's tube and incentive spirometer. So next, let's move on to the ninth clinical card. So what is the diagnosis? So this is just a picture and you have to just diagnose what it is. Please type in your answers in the chat box. Yes, so we got one correct answer, though it's not an answer, it's a question. Yes, it is carcinoma of penis. So as you can appreciate, we have an extensive, no, it's not Fournier's gangrene. If you appreciate the picture carefully, we don't have a swelling in the scrotum. It's the penis we are talking about. Okay, so we have an extensive fungating sort of an ulcer. It's quite fungating and proliferating near the prepuce, near the tip of the penis, and we also have some ulcers on the left side, okay, of the penis from the picture. So we have it here, extensive fungating and proliferating mass, and also here. And it's not possible in a webinar also. If you can say examine the patient, you might appreciate inguinal lymphadenopathy as well. So this is a case of carcinoma of penis. So it's not Fournier's gangrene because it's not a swelling of the scrotum. HPV ulcer, not that, because it's not, HPV ulcer cannot be so much extensive fungating and proliferative. So this is typically a carcinomatous sort of growth. So let's move on to our last clinical card. So this is a video. So I'm going to play it again. What is the diagnosis? So maybe if you won't get a video like this in your exam, but I just gave it as an added bonus because it's a very important and a very interesting finding which everyone can, you know, appreciate in a video also. Yes. So we got correct answers. Yes, everyone could correctly answer this one. So yes, a lot of correct answers here. So incisional hernia. So why incisional hernia? Because of course we can see an incision here, and when we ask the when we ask the patient to cough, yes, we can see positive cough impulse, which is a very important feature of any hernia. And we have to palpate and we have to feel for the defect also. Most probably this is going to be a defect in the rectus sheath. The rectus had not been properly closed. That can be a very important cause. There can be other causes also, like patient factors, malnutrition, chronic cough, chronic constipation. So the patient always suffers from a positive intra-abdominal pressure condition leading to positive intra-abdominal pressure, or it can be a fault of the surgeon also, improper closure, improper use of suture material, or improper technique. Okay, and malnutrition, etc. Diseases like diabetes, immunocompromised patients, they can develop incisional hernia. Incisional hernia can be a long case in your exam also. Okay, so let me just play this for the last time so that everyone can appreciate. Yes. Okay, so everyone got this answer correct. So with this we finish our discussion on the clinical cards. So I hope you were clear with the 10 different case scenarios that we discussed. Now let's move on to our discussion on some radiology images. So this is the first one. What is the diagnosis? So all of them are what is the diagnosis, because you have to just uh, identify the image. Yes. So we got correct answers here also, and we got answer pneumoperitoneum correct. Free gas under the diaphragm, it's also correct. Hollow viscous perforation is also correct. Gas under diaphragm is also correct, but it's better to mention free gas. I have discussed about this in our discussion on radiology in the app. So yes, hollow viscous perforation leading to accumulation of free gas. So the gas escaping from the hollow viscous accumulates in the roof of the abdomen, because gas being light, it ascends. And what is the roof of the abdomen? It is the diaphragm. So this is the chink of gas below the diaphragm. So this is the diaphragm, as you can see, the diaphragm on this side. This is the diaphragm, and below that we can see a black colored sort of structure, which is the free gas. So how would you know that it's gas? Because the lungs contain what? Air. Air is nothing. Gas, air, everything is same. So they appear what on X-ray? They appear black on X-ray. So normally we cannot have anything black here. It's going to be white. So I have also in our app, in our discussion on radiology, I have also shown one normal chest X-ray and one X-ray with free gas under the diaphragm. So there you can quite easily appreciate the difference. So this is going to be white in normal cases, but we have a hollow viscous perforation, free gas under the diaphragm, so it's appearing as a black chink below the diaphragm. And we can also appreciate the border, the diaphragm here. See, on this side we cannot appreciate the diaphragm as such, but here we can very clearly appreciate the border of the diaphragm. Why? Because we have contrasting substances on both sides. We have air above and we have air below also, and that is why the soft tissue border of the diaphragm is standing out very clearly. This is also a very important finding here. Next, let's move on to our next image. So what is the diagnosis? Yes, so we got correct answers again. So sigmoid volvulus, absolutely correct. And the sign is known as coffee bean shaped because it looks like a coffee bean. I have showed you one coffee bean when we have talked about sigmoid volvulus inside the app. So this looks like a coffee bean. It is also known as bent inner tube or tire sign because it looks like an inner tube of a tire. Nowadays we don't have tubes inside tires. We have tubeless tires. But in my childhood also, we had tubes inside tires, which if you bend, it's going to look sort of like this. So this is sigmoid volvulus. Next, this is number 3. So what is the diagnosis? Okay, so we only got one answer and it's absolutely correct. This is CA colon, and this finding here is known as apple core deformity. Why? Because imagine that this was an apple, okay? This whole thing, it was an apple, and someone has eaten the apple, the outer part of the apple, someone has eaten it away and has only left the core. So that is why it is looking like an apple core. And this is a classical sort of finding in carcinoma colon. So actually what has happened is that this is a barium enema. Okay, so we have pushed in barium through the anal opening and it has reached throughout the whole of large gut. But we have a mass here. So this is also the colon here. We also have the colon here. It's not that the colon is absent here, but we have a mass on this like this, and only this part of the lumen is free from the mass, and that is why the barium has passed through this part, but it has not passed through the whole part of the lumen. And that is why on x-ray sort of it's looking like that the colon is missing, but actually it's not missing, it is there, but the barium has not reached that part. So we basically have a mass here, and it is basically a carcinomatous growth, most probably high chance of a carcinomatous growth in the colon. So this is carcinoma colon, and this is known as apple core deformity. Next one, what is the diagnosis? Whatever you are guessing, whatever you want to say, you can please write in the chat box. This is just for discussion and for learning purpose. Okay, so we got answers. Uh, yeah, more or less everyone is correct. This is a renal stone. Why is it a renal stone? Someone has already mentioned one point, that we have a radio-opaque shadow near the psoas muscle. So this is the psoas muscle. This is the left psoas. This is the right psoas. This is the psoas shadow. Okay, this is the shadow of the psoas major muscle, and we have a radio-opaque structure over the psoas shadow. So that is number one. That is one point. Second point is that it is in the left or right, whatever. It's in the flank. This is basically a left renal stone. Okay, on the left flank. And the third is that it overlies, or it is sort of just lateral to the transverse process of L2 vertebra. So this is the L2, and it is overlying the transverse process of L2 vertebra. So these are the three important points which you have to mention if someone asks you, why do you think it's a renal stone? Yeah, so we got correct answers here. Okay, so I hope it's clear to you now. Those who could not get it, this is the finding we are referring to. As I have mentioned, radio opaque. So renal, 90% of renal stones are radio opaque, and 90% of gallstones are radiolucent. Okay, so only 10% of gallstones show up on X-rays, and 10% of renal stones don't show up. So majority of them show up on X-rays. So we have a radiopaque sort of structure here, overlaying the psoas shadow near the flank, and also lateral to or overlying the transverse process of L2 vertebra near the L2 vertebra. So this is renal stone. Next, number 5. What is the diagnosis? Any guesses, anyone? Yes, so we got one answer, pneumothorax. Yes, it is pneumothorax. This is basically tension pneumothorax. And why is it pneumothorax or tension pneumothorax? Because you can see that this lung is blacked out. So we have basically a pneumothorax of the right side. So we can appreciate the bronchovascular markings, the white markings throughout the lung on the left side. But on the right side, we cannot appreciate it. So where is the lung? See, this is the border of the lung. So just follow the cursor. This is the border of the lung. Okay. And inside it, you can again appreciate the bronchovascular markings. But yes, we don't have the lung throughout the whole of the right hemithorax. So this is basically a tension pneumothorax. We have talked about tension pneumothorax in a discussion on chest trauma. It's very important short note for both medicine as well as surgery. So there can be simple pneumothorax and there can be tension pneumothorax also. Tension pneumothorax is an emergency, and that is why there is no investigation for tension pneumothorax. Yes, this is a picture showing tension pneumothorax, of course, but if a patient presents to you and you are suspecting tension pneumothorax, don't wait for any radiology investigation. Just carry out the management. Yes, we have discussed about the management also. So can someone just mention the management here in short, in just one line? Management of tension pneumothorax. Yes, so we got correct answers. So this is basically needle thoracotomy through the fifth intercostal space. Okay, followed by chest tube insertion. That is not the immediate management. The first and most important immediate management is needle thoracotomy. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. So what is this and what is the diagnosis? Identify what this is. You don't need to, as per se, talk about the diagnosis. Identify what it is. Okay, so we got one correct answer. This is a T-tube cholangiogram. So this is the T-tube. So we have discussed it extensively in the app in our video on radiology. So this is the T-tube, and through it we have pushed in the dye. So this dye has reached into the whole of the biliary tree. So it has gone into the intrahepatic biliary radicals. So this is the region of the liver. It has also gone through the CBD, and this is opening into the duodenum. Okay, and that is why we can also see some of the contrast in the small bowel as well. Okay, and can anyone say what structure is absent here? So we have pushed in a dye into the biliary tract. So one structure should also have been highlighted or should also have taken up the contrast, but it has not because it's missing here. So what structure is that? Yes. So we got correct answers. The gallbladder is absent. No, not the CBD. This is the CBD. The CBD is not absent. This is the CBD. The gallbladder is absent because the gallbladder should have been somewhat like here. That is the first thing. And you also have another hint here. What is that hint? See, you can appreciate staple lines here. Can't you? So what is this incision? So we have basically stapled the incision. We have used skin staplers to close the incision. So this is nothing but a right subcostal incision, Cocker's incision. So this is a patient of, yes, who has undergone open cholecystectomy. And we are carrying out a T-tube cholangiogram post cholecystectomy. And we can also appreciate that the staples here. So definitely we have carried out open cholecystectomy in the patient, and after that we are carrying out T-tube cholangiogram. And definitely, since we have removed the gallbladder, we would obviously not be able to visualize the gallbladder. So this is T-tube cholangiogram. This is sometimes given in the exam. And the first and most important thing is to identify what it is. Sometimes if you have not ever visualized a T-tube cholangiogram, you won't be able to identify it. It's not a normal X-ray. Okay. So let's move on to our next one. Okay. So what is the diagnosis? Yes. So we got correct answers here as well. So this is intestinal obstruction. Important and most classical feature: multiple air fluid levels. Multiple air fluid levels. So we have the interface of air and fluid. So the black ones are the air, of course, as you know. So we have fluid filled in the inside the lumen of the intestine due to obstruction, and it creates this interface. So we have multiple of them, and they are present more or less in the center of the abdomen. So this is not a large bowel obstruction. And also, if you appreciate carefully, we can, you know, appreciate the valvuli conniventis and things, and that points to a small bowel. If it was a large bowel, we could have appreciated the horstrations. So these are the important differentiating points between the large bowel and the small bowel. We have talked about it in our radiology video in the app, how to differentiate between a small bowel and large bowel obstruction. So one of the important point is that the large bowel would be present in the periphery like this, and the small bowel would most probably be in the center. So this is intestinal obstruction. Another thing that I want to ask you in this slide is that what is this structure? What is this structure? Just follow the cursor. Yes. So I have already given you the hint before in clinical card discussion while we were talking about Ryle's tube. So this is how a Ryle's tube looks on an X-ray. So we have that green marking which was radio opaque, and this is that green line, and we had that lead shot at the end. So this is that one. So this is why we use radio opaque markings inside a Ryle's tube, so that we can appreciate whether it's in place and whether it's inside or not. Okay. So it's in the stomach in this case, as you can see. Okay. So let's move on to our next image. So this is our next image. This is an USG. Uh, I don't know whether it would be given in the exam, but this is such a common clinical finding or a common clinical case that it's good to know what this is. And we have also discussed it in our app in the radiology video. Yes, so the diagnosis is that it is GB stone. Okay. And this is the stone. So this is basically a large single calculi. So it most probably would come out to be a cholesterol stone. And this is the black thing which is posterior to the stone. This is what is known as posterior acoustic shadow. Okay, because the stone is impeding uh, the ultrasound. So this is the posterior acoustic shadow. This is the lumen of the gallbladder, and we can see a stone inside the lumen along with this posterior acoustic shadow. A very classical picture of gallstone. Let's move on to our next slide, number 9. What is the diagnosis? Yes, we got correct answers here as well. So this is extradural, epidural hemorrhage or hematoma, whatever. So we can see that we have a lens-shaped hemorrhage here. White is acute hemorrhage. Okay, so it's a non-contrast CT scan of brain, and we have a lens-shaped hyperdense structure here, and that points out to an epidural or extradural hematoma. If it was a subdural hematoma, then we would have got a bi like this, biconvex like this, crescentic shape. Sorry, this is the biconvex. In subdural hematoma, we would have got something like this, a crescentic shaped hematoma. And most commonly, SDH are usually chronic in old people, so it is usually not this white, this hyperdense. Okay. So we have talked about the different images of head injury in our radiology videos as well. And now let's, yes. So someone has asked that it is in SDH, is it concave or convex? Yes. It is crescent shape, or it is, so one side is concave and the other side is convex. So it is like this. Okay. And let's move on to our last radiology slide. Uh, this may not be asked in the exam, but it's good to know at least the basic things here. So this is a CT scan of the abdomen, and I have marked the structures as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So please try and identify the structures. This is a normal CT scan. We don't have any abnormality here. There is nothing to diagnose here, and you won't be given a CT scan of abdomen to diagnose conditions. This is just for your understanding. So this has 6 points here. So I'll wait for some time because people need to answer 6 points. Yes, so we got all correct answers. I did not expect that everyone would be able to identify structures so easily. I don't know, in my final year, I wouldn't have been able to identify structures in a CT abdomen so easily as you people have. So we got correct answers. So number one is the lumbar vertebra. Number two, this is the aorta, and this is the this is the inferior vena cava. Why? Because I have discussed this in our introduction to radiology video also. If you want to understand more about CT scan, you can refer to that video. So in a CT scan, whenever you will be provided with a CT scan, the first thing you have to think is that you are viewing the patient from the foot end. So this is a CT scan of the abdomen. So we are basically viewing the patient from our foot end. So this is the aorta, descending abdominal aorta. The number two is the descending abdominal aorta, which is coming towards us, and it is on the, yes, on the left side. And similarly, we have the inferior vena cava coming towards us. It is on the right side. So these two structures are the great vessels. Two is aorta, three is inferior vena cava. And if it's a CCT of the abdomen, in a post-contrast image, since we inject contrast into the, yes, blood, in a post-contrast image, the aorta would be white. Okay. And if it's a non-contrast image, then it would be grayish. So one is lumbar vertebra, two is aorta, three is inferior vena cava. Next, four is liver. This one is easy. And five and six are the, yes, kidneys, left and right. Everyone got it right. So these are the kidneys. Okay, so this is at the level of the kidney. You can get various cross sections in the abdomen. Sometimes the kidneys are not visualized if it's above the level of the kidney. Okay. So I don't think CT scan of abdomen would be asked in the exam, and if at all asked, it would be a normal CT scan most commonly. And if you are quite unlucky, I don't know, you might be asked about a diagnosis, but that's very rare. So with this, we finish our discussion on clinical card and radiology. I hope you could understand the basic, principles of a few clinical cards and why we were like pointing to that diagnosis. And we are posting clinical cards regularly on our Facebook page. So if you are not following that, or if you have not, gone through the clinical cards as of now, please like the page and follow it to get more updates about clinical cards. We also post answers there and try to answer the clinical cards in the posts. So that would help in your exam. So we'll just wait for 1 to 2 minutes if someone has any questions. Name of the page in Facebook, it's Surgipedia. Okay, you can just search Surgipedia and you would get the page. Okay, so if you have any academic doubts while watching any video, we have a doubt box, a doubt section in the app. So you can use it and we would try to answer it. It would be going to your email, the answers. So I don't think anyone else has any question right now. So we would be concluding the session here. So thank you for, being present. Thank you for attending today's session. So we would be conducting these webinars regularly. We are trying to conduct it every Sunday. Okay, we have a question. During the exam, do we just mention the diagnosis or describe the findings? See, if in the clinical card it's written that what is the diagnosis, then please at first mention the diagnosis, because as I've told previously also, the examiners are taking a lot of exams, a lot of students are there, and the examiners don't have so much of time. So if the question is what is the diagnosis, please answer the diagnosis first, and then let the examiner ask you why you think so. After that, you describe the findings as to why you have set the diagnosis. Sometimes a lot of examiners won't even go into that. If you can diagnose, they are going to leave you if he or she is in a hurry. Okay, so it's better to avoid answering as much as possible at the first. This is the sort of tip of Viva. So whenever you're facing a Viva, examiner is asking you a particular question, please answer just the relevant part of that question. Don't go into detail, don't go into too much background and findings. If the examiner asks you about them and the next question, then you can answer that. Okay, so we are going to conclude the session as of now. So please follow us on Facebook for updates on webinars, for updates on other things. We are also sending SMS to you for notifying you about the webinars and all. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. See you next time. Thank you.